Fitness with Paul Rosen.
Our diets, our Western diets in America are just really, you just don't realize how poor they really are.
What would you say to others who would like to feel better?
Sometimes you need to find the instruction. That's where the testing and everything comes in, because without that knowledge, there's no way I could have got to the point where I'm at today.
Straight talk about health.
And then I start preaching and telling them what I've been doing. And this guy named Paul Rosen has changed my life.
With your host, Paul Rosen.
By the way, the information contained in this program is not approved by the FDA, nor intended to treat, diagnose, or claim to cure any medical condition or disease as defined by Western medicine. However, skilled practitioners of many disciplines have found nutrition response testing to be a highly reliable supportive technology for assessing the health and fitness of the body's functional system.
All right, Paul, let's get right to it. What's the big deal about food labels? Why is that something we should be concerned about?
Food labels are actually something that has been forced on the food industry. Food labels are not something that the food industry actually stepped up and decided, hey, you know what? Our consumers are so important that we really want to show them what's in their food so they can make a truthful, factual, differentiated decision to determine what they buy.
So let me guess, Paul. I'm going to take a wild guess, go way out on a limb, and think that maybe the government has something to do with this. Is this right?
Well, the funny thing is we sling around the term government as if it's some sort of alien force, not related to the everyday average man and woman. And, come on. I mean, I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm just saying that in general, this is the way we look at it. This is a little bit of a digression, but when you're a small individual without much power and you're being impinged upon by someone who has more power, and it's, against all fairness, all fair play, it's kind of nice to have some third party who might be overseeing that overzealous, overpowered person or organization, right?
So it's a good
some
thing.
way that you can appeal, some place you can appeal to for maybe a more even-handed approach. I mean, would you say that would be useful?
I agree with that. Let me backtrack a little bit. You actually were right about the way I phrased that. I referred to government almost with a big G, like it is a big Illuminati conspiracy kind of thing. That's not what I meant, actually. I should have said government regulators have something to do with this.
Yeah, I of course, did not take any offense to what you were saying, but it brought up for me, as you always do in a great way, it brought up for me the notion that we think that government in general is just, this horrible thing. But you ever watch one of the, the old Westerns where you got the cattle baron, and the cattle baron hires all of the officials in the town, and some poor individual whose farm is being overrun by the cattle. Where does he or she have to go? Right? Nowhere.
I think
so. It's not a bad thing to have a third party who might have some compromising control, some more even hand over the outcome of decisions in your life. The problem is that it's very easy to fall prey to that cattle baron, sort of approach. And when government becomes dominated by the organizations or individuals that it's supposed to help regulate fairly, that's when things start to fall apart. And unfortunately, to a more of a degree than probably any of us would want to admit, that's what's happened to the regulatory agencies, like the FDA. And I'm not just the one saying this. I mean, I've read plenty of books by whistleblowers, people who were part of the regulatory agencies, who just became completely how should I say? What's the word I want?
Removed from reality?
Disillusioned.
Disillusioned with what?
With what they thought was a high-minded organization for the whose job it was to look after the little guy.
So let me summarize your points, Paul. You say third party. Are you referring by that to government regulators? When
yeah.
You say, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe is it possible that sometimes regulation that starts out with good intentions doesn't always end up where it should be? Maybe they get out of control, or maybe they end up regulating things they should not, or it could be even that the regulation itself just goes off in directions that the original intentions never envisioned.
And you know how that happens?
No.
Just the nature of people. I mean, honestly, we have to keep ourselves in check on a regular basis. There's no time when we can just set it on auto, and check out. There's just no time. People just, greed is good and money is important, and our own self-interest is necessary, and all that stuff. I mean, even me doing this show, I know that there are some cynical individuals who would think that me doing this show is just about getting business, and to some degree, it is about getting business because nobody's paying my ticket to the amount of money that it costs me to do this show on a regular basis. So yes, there is a little bit of self-interest in there, but the self-interest, I hope, is includes a lot of true facts and honest effort to try to impart some real useful information for people so that they can make better decisions about how they treat themselves and, of course, what they put in their mouth.
What this means is there's always some push and pull between regulation and private incentive. Is that right?
Or public incentive. I mean, just incentive in general. My point is that the FDA was originally seen as a high-minded regulatory way of keeping of
keeping manufacturers honest about their products.
Exactly.
Can you say that?
Exactly. And it's really, unfortunately, over the last 70, 80 years has just devolved into this self congratulatory, self backslapping and corporate supportive agency. The FDA, the USDA, the same. All of them really need some individuals who can look at them and get a handle on what has become of these organizations, because the honest people who have really taken their own lives, taken big hits for it, the whistleblowers, which I commend a lot, have shed eyes on some most amazing things. There are plenty of books out there. All you got to do is Google them, and when you read them, you go, food labeling. Now, shouldn't that be a fairly simple, fairly straightforward act of presenting useful information for people? And unfortunately, it's not what it seems.
Okay, so big institutions like the FDA, among other government agencies, inevitably become self-perpetuating. They're doing work in order to justify their own existence. Their missions tend to become clouded over time, and maybe there are outside influences on those missions that can have an unhealthy effect.
The corporations, the food companies, were forced to put labels on food. So that's number one. And when you're forced to do something, human nature resists. So then what you're looking for is you're looking for all different kinds of ways to try to parse and skimp and resist what information is actually in those labels.
But I think as the discussion will prove, it's not just human nature that provokes that resistance. It's also going to be the fact that maybe they don't want you to know everything that's in that food. Is that right?
Indeed. And then it comes to the ingredients that are in them. For example, the various chemicals that have been stamped with the generally recognized as safe label by the FDA, based on poor science, based on compromised science, based on all kinds of things which should make one highly skeptical that those ingredients, that those non-food ingredients that end up in food are safe.
I think even if you're a relative optimist and you believe that regulation can be subjective, there are these outside forces exerting pressure. So, of course, sometimes the food labels that we're seeing are just not as reliable as we'd like them to be. Would that be safe to say?
Yeah, and I mean, just for example, the minimum daily requirements for vitamins in general, right? It turns out that they have little meaning for us as consumers.
So for our purposes, if we're looking at a food label and it says 100% of your minimum daily required vitamins are present in a serving of this food, that may or may not be accurate?
No, well, that, but also just the minimum daily requirement. Where did that requirement come from? I mean, does a 6'4", 250-pound NFL football player require the same amount of vitamins that a 4'11", 95-pound, 90-year-old grandmother requires?
That's a very good point. So where are they getting that? Where does that come from?
Well, exactly. That's the point. That's the question. Where is it coming from? Who's making these proclamations? Right? Anyway, point is, they aren't necessarily the minimum daily requirements. They're not really viable. It's not really useful information unless you're just using it as a kind of a guesstimate, overall. And then you could just say, you'd be more accurate in saying people need vitamins and minerals, throughout their day. Be more accurate.
Right. I think as consumers, we're a little more savvy than we used to be, but maybe not nearly as savvy as we should be. And this is one good example. I think too many of us, if we see something like that on a label, for example, this contains all the vitamins you need all day long, just take one serving, many will take that at face value. They won't question that whatsoever.
Yeah. And this is why I want to do this show. You've got to understand the basis of the whole enterprise from the beginning. That gives you at least a glimpse as to, how comfortable you might be with the labeling process. An example, on the labels, there's all kinds of information besides the advertising and whatnot. One of those pieces of information is nutritional facts. How many carbohydrates, how many proteins, how much fat, how much sugar is in this food, right? It's a useless piece of information. The whole part of the label could be used for something much more important and much more beneficial to people.
So nutrition facts, that particular label is seen on all kinds of food, and we'll get to the uselessness part momentarily, but it does include information, as you indicated, Paul, about calories, fat, cholesterol content, sodium content, total carbohydrates. There's all kind of stuff on there that we as consumers feel might be useful. Why is it not?
Totally useless. Well, in part because if you're eating fresh food, fresh food like from the around the circumference of the store that you pick up, raw dairy, high quality pasture raised, organic meats, fruits and vegetables. It doesn't matter how much you eat. It doesn't matter. Because your body will self-regulate. When you're eating the right amounts of food, you stop eating. The problem is with man and woman-made foods, right, and the chemicals that are often associated with them, they create all kinds of interferences with normal, satiation mechanisms in the body, which can fool it. Perfect example. Eat a bag of chips, right, with all kinds of garbage in them.
Do I have to?
I'm just saying.
Okay.
Eat a bag of chips, and
All right,
you'll want to.
I thought this was a
and
demand.
Within 5 minutes, you'll eat another bag. And within 10 minutes from that, you'll eat another bag.
That's very true. I think some food actually makes you hungrier for more of that food. Is that right?
What it is the interference with the normal operation of the human body's capacity to self-regulate. So it's disrupting. It's, in fact, destroying that body's capacity. And so I make this statement. What's the proof of that? The proof of that is over a third of the population of the United States of America are diabetics or going to become diabetics. I mean, do you think that's just genetics? No, because I got people walking in my clinic every week who are diabetics. I ask them, do you have any diabetes in the family? And they say no. Well, how did that happen? They ate themselves that way. They ate themselves into it with processed foods, right? Cakes, cookies, candies, pop, all kinds of fast food. They ate themselves into that condition.
So your point, Paul, in terms of food labeling is that the nutrition facts label in particular may or may not even be accurate in terms of the information it's giving us. It doesn't matter. It's food that's not good for you regardless. Whether or not they're giving you that nutrition facts label, you just should not be eating this stuff.
And to prove that they're useless, they are in larger letters and they take more space than the ingredients do.
And I'm guessing this is all FDA or government, big G government required. Is that right?
If you look at the label, it's usually the nutrition facts are usually in a rectangulated space, right? Highlighted, big, bold. You can't miss it. And the reason I know that is because when I send my patients back to the store to read the labels, right, that's what they come back with.
Nutrition facts.
Yeah. I'll say, because I say, you need to avoid all concentrated sweeteners. That includes sugar. So they come back, and the question they invariably ask is, it looks like I can't eat anything. Because the labels say there's sugar in, this particular food, which I thought had no sugar in it. Tomato sauce, for example. Right? And I go, you're looking at the wrong label. Celery has sugar in it. Cucumbers have sugar in them. Carrots have sugar in them. Beets have sugar in them. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about added concentrated sweeteners. My point being, in the food label, that's what the most prominent display is on the label.
Quickly, Paul, before we get to the history of the FDA and how they've developed and maybe devolved, in your words, over the years, let's go over this area where the FDA says there are 3 key areas of importance on our food labels. And quickly, those 3 key areas are, in order, serving size, the percent daily value, which you covered earlier, the percent of vitamins we should be getting every day. And they're also concerned about nutrients. These include vitamin A and B, for example, calcium, dietary fiber. These are the things the FDA says we should be looking for on our food labels, and that's why they require that information on the labels of so many foods. Your thoughts? Yeah, you were just giving me the stone face there. So why are these things not important?
Well,
don't nod off. Don't let that music put you right out there. It might me, so you might have to carry it from this point.
I brought up the one point is understanding that putting on a food label the minimum daily requirements, right, make no sense just from the standpoint of that dramatic comparison that I made, right? A 4'11" grandma, 90 years old, 90 pounds versus, a 6 foot, 4 or 5 football player weighing 250. So do you really think that the nutritional requirements for the one is the same as the other? So that's at best it's a misleading piece of information, right?
Agreed. So the serving, that doesn't make any sense. The percent required. So we've covered that. What about serving size? Why is that not such a important thing?
Same thing. For the same reason.
And usually you'll see, let's go back to your example of a bag of chips. You'll see on a bag of chips it'll say servings 2.
Right.
In that bag of chips, you're actually getting more than one.
It's all based on it's all based on the food industry's corporate push for profits, right? And so I mean, I know that's a cynical kind of approach, but that's what's permeated the process at this point. The emphasis should be on the ingredients. The big white label in a rectangulated, whited out black letter space area on the label should be devoted to the ingredients. But if you look at a label, generally speaking, you'll see sometimes it's almost impossible to find the ingredients because the lettering is so small. 6-point type, right? And in the same coloring as the label itself. Very difficult to see. But
what about...
you don't need to label celery. You don't need to label the ingredients in a tomato. The only thing you need to label is a pre-processed, packaged a food, right? That's what you need to label. And unfortunately, at this stage of the game, not all, and that's why you have to read the ingredients, forget the nutrition facts, not all, but most pre-packaged foods are foods no human being should be consuming.
What about that third element the FDA says is important, nutrients? Why is that information not necessarily important?
Nutrients
to us?
are important, but if you're eating a cross-section of vegetables of all different stripes and natures and adding some fruits in there, generally speaking, except for diabetics or people who have inflammatory autoimmune diseases or other types of infectious conditions in them, they shouldn't be eating any fruit. And various types of meats from red to white to fish, etc., which are raised, in their normal habitat, without hormones, without antibiotics, without foods or dyes or other types of chemicals, right? And dairy, generally speaking, except again for those people who have ongoing infectious diseases or chronic other types of functional illnesses, fibromyalgia, et cetera, many different types of conditions, probably should, watch the dairy, be careful. But that dairy should be unpasteurized, raw. There's plenty of it out there. Again, pasture-raised, free of different types of preservatives, additives, colorings, etc. None of that stuff should be there. Then it really doesn't matter, right? You should definitely be taking some from all those food groups, proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And, simply speaking, make sure that you're eating, say, a various proportion of those things. If you want to put proportions on there, like 40, 30, 30, 40 carbohydrate, 30 protein, 30 fat, something like that. For most folks, that's going to work. But here's the thing. If you want to know who you are and what your requirements are, you're an individual, and a personalized approach is the only way to know for certain what your real requirements are. That's the only way to know your personalized approach. But you can't go wrong with a, 40, 30, 30 in general.
And as you indicated, you can't go wrong with a tomato or a fish if they're raised properly. You don't need labels on those. But for our purposes, Paul, do some foods which are healthy and natural include nutritional information on the labels?
Yeah, they often do. They're often required to do that. Although you don't see them on like a stick of celery or a stick of, generally on those vegetables, they're not there.
But about some of the foods you've indicated, like the non-dairy milk and stuff like that, that will still include some FDA-mandated information.
Indeed.
Okay, so watch out for that. And just because the information is there, then, is my point, doesn't mean the food is bad. It's just that a lot of the information you're getting on these labels, A, may not apply to you at all, and B, may be kind of useless anyway.
Back in the 30s, there was a real push for something called pure food and pure drug, because more and more hucksters were selling products. They were selling jams and jellies, for example, just colored sugar water with some gelatin in it and calling it a jam or a jelly. There were lots of hucksters and fraudsters out there who were trying to sell various types of processed food to people, and it was recognized. And there was a push in the government as a protective measure to pass some kind of legislation. And what ultimately passed was called the U.S. Pure Food and Drug Act, which ultimately became the precursor to the FDA.
Did that act itself create the agency, or, as you said, create
Yes.
the precursor of the agency?
Well, I could look that up for you, but
okay, so
it doesn't really matter.
Inevitably, this legislation led to the FDA. Also, let's define our terms. By pure food and drugs, it sounds to me they're not necessarily defining healthy food. They're just saying if you buy a jam or a jelly, which to my mind isn't necessarily the most healthy thing, it's loaded with sugar, you should at least get something that's pure by their definition. What do they mean by that?
Well, they mean it should have strawberries in it.
Okay, so it's not some artificial thing that's been loaded with sugar and made to look like strawberry jam. It should be strawberry jam with some strawberry content.
But the good intentions were forced astray due to the financial greed of an ever-growing food and drug industry, right? It was the food industry that first began to pressure the FDA with every means possible, including politics, lengthy court battles, and expensive lawsuits, right? So after 100 years of continual decline and pressure, compromise, right? What we have now is a massive food industry that has perfected the art of producing cheap, artificial foods designed solely for profit with very little protection and, most importantly, very little nutrient density for human beings to consume.
One more note, you can get a free chapter of Paul Rosen's book, The Missing Piece. Just go to his website, acunatural.com, acunatural.com, and fill out the dialog box that pops up. Rest assured, no information you provide will ever be shared with anyone else. So, what are you waiting for? Get going on your personal road to wellness today.